It needs to like come from that side, and then another one is gonna have to come over here, and then that one's gonna somehow go in the middle, connecting.
The word create means to bring something into existence, to form something out of nothing. For some students, the beginning of a project is an invitation to infinite possibilities, and for others, it signals a moment of terror, not knowing where to begin. In this video, we hear from practicing designers about how they begin their design process, their advice for editing and for coming back to the core concept, and insight about what they do when they get stuck.
I think beginning a project depends on the project, right? It depends on the scale or the application. It also depends on the interest, like what actually pulls you into that project. And I think for me, individually, it's fairly similar to how my process is fairly similar to how I introduce projects to students. And so one of the things that I like to do is to get something that asks a key question about the project, because it's inevitable that that blank page sometimes is just daunting, right? That you're looking at this thing and you have so many ideas, it's hard to figure out which idea you're going to start with. The key for me is to find out what question asks a fundamental, or asks about a fundamental quality or a fundamental accomplishment that can happen within that project. And so that can come from sketching, it can come from digital modeling, sometimes it can come from writing. And it depends on the person, right? For me, the medium might vary a little bit by project, but I found out with my students, some students are at first more comfortable with words than they are with lines. So maybe for them it's about writing out ideas and then starting to put some drawing down to that. Where other students can just start with a drawing pencil and they can just sketch things out, or maybe a 3D model. It really is about finding this thing that develops a level of interest or a level of inquiry and asking a question about that. Sometimes it's very directly related to the project. Maybe it's in architecture, right? Maybe it's about how the street and the building site relate, and there's something interesting there that you can start with. Or maybe it's about a constraint or a parameter. Maybe it's something that the city requires or that the client needs within the project. And sometimes it has nothing to do with the project. Maybe there's a point of inspiration that has to do with film or poetry or the local community that you can draw from. I think one of the things that makes people nervous, particularly beginning designers, is they think they're looking for this silver bullet. They're looking for this like absolute perfect way to start a project. And in reality, those moments, those epiphanies are probably more random than we realize. And so for me, it's about getting out a ton of ideas in a very initial schematic way and then narrowing down from there and finding out which one is the fundamental or essential question. And then once you have that, you can start to elaborate and add more detail in, but not worrying about if it's the perfect end at the beginning, because the beginning is really about, it's about the beginning. It's about just getting moving.
I'm Sarah Kuchar, and I am the owner and creative director of Sarah Kuchar Studio, located in Chicago. I try to create a very concept-driven studio and approach to design. So I always try to start with really broad takes at what the concept could be. So starting with the site or location, the client's history, the client's brand. We researched the heck out of Lake Michigan, Chicago, Illinois, and the river. Literally, like anything that we saw that was interesting, we wrote it down, and then we started to like kind of write down smaller things about those facts that we found, and then imagery that kind of supported those facts. And from that, we created 3 different concepts based on the location of this project. When I get stuck, I tend to go back to the concept, the thing that we created at the very beginning that has lots of descriptions and images and is your like project guide. Go back to that, because everything should really stem off of that. So rather than just blind browsing on Pinterest or Instagram or other magazines, go back to your concept and read through the words and look through the images and try to get inspired by that and see if something triggers an idea out of that instead of going into, Pinterest where there's just ideas about anything else. So I think kind of going back to your roots almost in the design is where I usually go when I get stuck. There's always a lot of ideas that you'll see or you'll be inspired by and you really want it on a project because it's a great idea. But just remember you can use it on another project in future, and it might not be the best solution for this one. I think the best projects are well-edited projects.
The way I typically start is I still start by hand, so I'm very analog that way. But you start with things that you know. What are the parameters? Is it the site boundary? Is it the building envelope? What are the parameters? And then from that, you just start kind of brainstorming ideas based on the concept that we've established with the client.
For restaurants, for instance, there are certain rules of thumb, I guess, that you would consider precedents, like how big a kitchen might need to be, or cook line, a bar, for instance, what height the bar is, rules of thumb as far as that's concerned, design layout. So we lay out things that we know, like Sean said earlier, we know certain things, how many people at a bar would take up, and then we lay out that, and then everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting for us, and we can't really turn it off, but when we go into a space that someone who doesn't design restaurants has designed, we can tell almost immediately because they aren't using these precedent tools or these rules of thumb. When a bar is not 42 inches tall, you know that there's something kind of off with it. Or if a four-top table is too big, then they can potentially miss out on additional seating. So we can spot things right off the bat. So I guess that those things would be considered precedents. So as restaurant and bar designers, we go out to restaurants and bars and see what our competition is doing, but also those design firms out there that we aspire to be like. They do fantastic work, and so whether it's in Dallas or New York or LA or Paris, anywhere in Europe, anywhere we travel, we're always checking out and getting ideas and inspiration from other designs.
And also magazines and books, of course. I receive some emails daily from a certain website that I might like, or I admire their design aesthetics. So I look at those daily. I look at Hospitality Design Magazine, for instance, Architectural Record, that sort of thing. Keep up with what's happening in the world.
We often ask clients that what their inspiration for the restaurant or the house is, and we have them do their own homework so that they can either tear things out of magazines or things they flag on the internet. Pinterest was helpful in that regard, but sometimes the client doesn't know when to stop, and they'll start pinning things that don't make sense to us, and they're very disparate ideas, and they think they go together, but they don't. So we have to manage the expectation of the client with their random pins.
Maybe one way to do that is to actually, print out different images, different materials, different concepts that are pulling you in all these different directions, and look at them all together and see if there's a common thread that maybe can pull them together, or if not, just realize that they don't go together. Realize that the styles don't match, or there has to be a pure design aesthetic for a project to work.
I think it's up to that person, that designer, to what's the core of the design, what's the core concept, and does this image that you love so much, does it support that core concept, or is it just an additional thing that you just happen to like? And it's okay to have exceptions to the rule, but you got to have enough rules in place to establish the concept. And so once you have the established concept, then this random shiny thing that you like, that you found last night, does it support the concept? And oftentimes it probably doesn't. And you just like it for different reasons. But you want to incorporate it because you like it, but you have to, it's the design that's driving the thing. It's not all things that you like stuck to a board. You have to develop that core kernel and to grow it into something that's cohesive.